Now welcome back everybody. Today we're going to be talking about flight times. Now, we're going to be doing both archery with a bow and bullets with a gun. Now, why am I talking about this? There's a lot of misconceptions out there, a lot of bad information. And a lot of this comes from Hollywood and they're showing snipers. Now, whether it's on something like the Discovery or History Channel, where they're doing a sniper special, they like to make things more dramatic. Same thing with the movies. When snipers take a shot in a movie, it's way more dramatic than what it actually is or what long range is. And they talk about flight times and they try to make it seem super crazy. And in reality, the type of flight times you're seeing in these movies is more what you're going to see in extended long range when you're dealing with 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 yards. Not what we're dealing with when we're dealing with long range hunting distances. Now we all know this. Any movie or anything based on a true story, it's why it's based, they add stuff in. And so they try to make it seem super difficult, super hard, super crazy. But in reality, the flight times are actually pretty short, especially for the type of projectiles that we're pushing and the velocities that we're pushing them at. Now, archery is something I'm bringing up just because there is a double standard there, and it'll be a great comparison. What I'm talking about here is there is always a double standard with guys of hunting. Now, with archery, because I'm a big archery hunter, and you see it all the time. Actually, Michael Waddell was just talking about this when he was talking in a video about where to aim, about aiming low for an archery shot because there's a high probability that deer is going to duck. Now, for those who don't archery hunt, what happens is it hears something, it sees something. That animal is in such a close proximity that the string snapping or the movement of the string or some movement of yours catches its eye, its ear, and its natural instinct is to duck down low, dig in, and either take off straight or turn and go. And so when they duck like that, if you have a regular aim point, you can either hit high or miss. And so aiming low on purpose, if they don't duck, you're getting in the heart, and if it ducks, you're still getting a lung shot. So that's the purpose behind that. But it happens all the time, even with short-range rifle. As good as we can be, even the best. T-Bone Turner, world record holder for archery. I've seen him miss a doe at 20 yards with a bow. So does it happen? Yes. But do they explode on them and say you're unethical, you shouldn't be doing it? No. Every single person will go, hey, you know what? It's hunting, you know what you're doing, and stuff happens. You know, deer duck, they move, blah, blah, blah. As good as your intentions are, no matter what, there's variables outside of your control and you do your best. Very logical, right? The problem is, though, when it comes to long range, that logic goes out the window because they don't like it. And so if a long range hunter misses a shot, it's not, oh, you know what, dude, you'll get him next time. At least it was a clean miss. You know, it's hunting, stuff happens. There's variables outside your control. No, it's you're unethical. You're destroying hunting. You're the worst kind of individual. You shouldn't even be attempting that, blah, 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 blah. And there is a complete double standard there. Now, same thing if it happens to get wounded. Now, are long range and archery the same as far as the animal movements? Not really. And I'm going to break that down. But this is such a double standard that is not only ridiculous, but also counterproductive. All it does is turn hunters against hunters. It puts people who don't know anything about it against them, because as soon as you start saying unethical, it creates a problem. But is it any different than the rest? No. What is different, though, is there's an estimated 15 million hunters in the U.S. last year alone. That's just in the United States. 15 million. Now, if you look at where the most wounded animals comes from and the most misses, it is hands down archery. There is more wounded and lost animals during archery than any other platform or method of hunting. The other one is close range rifle. Now that might seem odd and be like, oh, well, it should be the long range guys, right? No. There's a lot of guys that don't practice because it's so close. You know, I got guys that'll literally blow dust out of their scope. They haven't touched it. They don't even mess with zero. They shoot the pie plate 100 yards and say, I'm good as long as they're on there somewhere. They don't even, or some don't even practice, or they do it a week prior. And then they go out and think, oh, because it's right there, I can take a shot. And they end up taking a lot of bad shots that you really don't want to do. Now, at long range, that's not a thing, because we have to be very picky because of the distance. Not about hitting the animal, not about making that shot, but the simple recovery of the animal. There's a lot of times where I've passed shots just because the recovery would be ridiculous or impossible. Not that I couldn't make the shot, but there is an issue of recovery. And so there's a lot more factors on that. And so we are very, very selective on our shots. It's just plain and simple. And we also train significantly more than anybody else out there. I mean, being in all the different parts from, you know, muzzleloader, archery, all that, and seeing there are some people that are pretty hardcore and trained, but pretty much every long range shooter I know and long range hunter is training year round. We're always updating equipment, scopes, rangefinders, ballistic programs, everything. I mean, I changed last year. I got a bunch of new stuff and changed over, and I'm still doing that this year. It's always striving to get the best equipment to be the most effective in the field. Doesn't mind, you know, we don't mind spending the money, we don't mind spending the time, because that's what's required. A lot of hunters don't do that. And that's kind of why I'm bringing up the archery, to show that we already know archery. Again, that's where you're going to see the most wounded animals. If you don't believe me, pay attention on Facebook during hunting time. Watch during archery season in different states, and watch where you're going to see the most, hey, is this good blood? Hey, this is my situation, can't find the deer, should I back out? Hey, does anybody have dogs for tracking? Oh, I shot this deer, it looked good, but I never recovered it. You know, there's all those different stuff, and you're going to see that a ton in the archery season. Now, people will claim the reason that we don't see that with long range is because we just don't talk about it, which is a load. We talk about it all the time. It just doesn't happen that often. It's very rare that we ever miss a shot because of the training and how selective we are. It seems if it looks easy, people are more tempted to do it. And so close range, that's where all the issues tend to be. But let's go ahead and dive into both of these and do these comparisons. Now, first off, what is time of flight? Time of flight is the time it takes, let's say if we take the bullet, from the time it leaves the barrel to reaching the target. Or if you're talking archery, how long it takes from releasing the arrow from the bow and it flying and hitting its target. That is our time of flight. Now, an easy way to think about the travel is in miles per hour. So, if you take a car and you're going 60 miles per hour, that means that you're going to travel, if you maintain that 60 miles per hour, you're going to travel 60 miles in 1 hour. If you go 100 miles per hour, same thing. If you maintain that speed, you're going to go 100 miles in 1 hour. Now, with these, we do feet per second. Now, these will not maintain the velocity. They are going to slow down depending on how much drag there is. Now, that's based on aerodynamics and a bunch of other stuff with the environment, but they're not going to maintain it. So it's going to be not quite even, but we're going to do an even comparison here just to give you the broad spectrum, and then we'll kind of break it down a little bit more. Now let's talk about this. Let's talk about distance and how it translates across. So in rough terms, as far as not only difficulty but rough time of flight, if you have a bullet that is traveling 3,000 feet per second from the muzzle, and you have an arrow going 300 feet per second from a bow, every 10 yards with a bow is going to be equivalent roughly to 100 yards with a rifle in both difficulty and in time of flight roughly. Now, what does that mean? So 200 would be 20 yards for a bow. 300 with a rifle is 30 yards, and it's going to keep going up. So if you were at 100 yards with a bow, that'd be the equivalent of a 1,000-yard shot with a rifle. So because this is moving 300 feet per second, if it maintained that, that means it would be covering 300 feet or 100 yards in 1 second. So we're going to stick with that just basic number, so it's very easy. Now, this going 3,000 feet per second means it's going to cover in 1 second 3,000 feet or 1,000 yards. And so for this, the rough time of flight is 1/10 of a second per 10 yards. So if you're at 50 yards, that's going to be a half a second or 0.5. 60, 0.6. And you're going to keep going up. Once you get to 100 yards, it's a 1 second flight time. Now, with this, each 100 yards is going to be 1/10 of a second. And so at 500 yards, we are looking at half a second flight time. Now again, I know that I'm going on this generalized. I will go more specific in a second. This is just showing an even comparison so that it's easy to follow. Now, let's look at realistic distances for this. Now, depending on where you're at, if you are in the south in the deep whitetail woods, generally speaking, your shots are between 20 and 40 yards. And that's encompassing all of it. I know some places are going to be a little longer, some shorter, but just averaging everything out across the board. A lot of people like to zone in and think that where they hunt in their state is the only one. I'm looking at the broad spectrum. So 20 to 40 is our normal for that. Now, if we go into western states, we're looking realistically 40 to 60 yards for a bow. Now, people might think that's crazy, but it's open terrain, you're on the ground, you're generally not in a tree stand, and so it has longer ranges. That's just a normal thing. You practice all the time, it's very easy. To look at what you can actually do, Cameron Hanes, great guy, love his stuff. He practices and actually does long range archery, or what's called long range archery. He practices to 160 yards on a deer-sized vital target and can do that consistently. But his actual hunting is around 80, 90 yards. No different than a long-range hunter. We practice at really long ranges further than what we plan on actually hunting. That way we get that much more skilled and that much more comfortable. Now we're going to do two comparisons here. The 20 to 40 for whitetail and the 40 to 60 for western states like elk and stuff. Now, let's talk again at this generalized flight time of 1 second per. Now, for the guy that is all the time shooting 20 yards, your flight time, if they were not losing momentum, would be the same time for your 20-yard shot as a rifle's 200-yard shot. If you go out to 40, which would be 400 yards, which a lot of people think is crazy long with the rifle, really isn't, you're having the same flight time. So you taking your 40-yard normal shot with a bow that you think is absolutely perfectly fine is no different than a 400-yard shot. Now let's go out to the western state one where we're talking 40 to 60. Now we've already covered the 40 and the 400. So let's go out to the further part of that and let's look at 6. And the reason I want to focus on the 660 yard is the vast majority of long-range hunting shots are done inside 600 yards. Everybody thinks because of sniper specials, the 1,000-yard thing sticks in everybody's hand. And, you know, a lot of rifle companies will say, hey, dude, this is good to go to 1,000 yards. The rifle is. Doesn't mean the trigger monkey, the individual, is. But that sticks in their mind, and for some reason think that's what we do. No, the vast majority of long-range hunting shots are inside 600 yards, and the vast majority of those are inside 400. Not a lot of us are out there taking those further shots. It's the guys who are capable of doing that are doing those further shots. So you're on your western hunt and you take a 60-yard shot on your elk. It goes in perfect. That elk goes down and everybody's celebrating. Well, that's no different than a 600-yard shot if those bullets were doing the same thing. So you're looking at a 0.6 of a second. Well, let's look at it. That's just over half a second, which in reality, time it, it's not a lot of time. That bullet's getting there very quickly. That arrow is getting there very quickly. Now let's actually look though at reality. This is going out much slower, it's less aerodynamic, and is going to drop and lose energy and velocity much, much faster. And it doesn't have the same type of energy as this. Energy with this is terminal ballistics. That's what's going to be transitioned into it. As this bullet expands, it's going to dump energy into that target in hydraulic or hydrostatic shock. The energy with this is transferring into the flight. So that poundage of the bow is transferring that energy, and more velocity energy, generally the better penetration you're going to get. And arrow construction has something to do with that too, and your tip. So the arrow is actually going to lose velocity and drop faster. This is smaller and more aerodynamic, and it is going to bleed velocity a lot slower. So the bullet is actually going to have shorter flight time. So if we take that same distance, so let's look at that 50-yard shot. Let's go, so 550. The flight times between those, the arrow is going to lose velocity more and is actually going to take longer to get to that 50-yard mark than the bullet is, because this is more aerodynamic and it's not going to drop as fast. And so the further you go out, and it's going to be that way across the board. You know, once you get to 20 yards, there's a difference there. 30 yards, there's a little bit more difference. You know, 40, 50, it keeps getting bigger. And so in reality, we did an even comparison if they were maintaining that speed. But in reality, the bullet at long range is having less flight time than this. So when somebody brings up flight time and they say, oh, well, your flight time, it could end up having an animal wound, it can move, etc. And then they do the same thing with archery, and then they think it's okay. Well, the archery actually takes longer to get to that animal in what we would call an even shot on normal distances. So realistically, if those people are honestly believe that, they're being hypocrites. Because this, you have not only a longer flight time because it's going to bleed off more, it also doesn't kill the same. And so it's completely different on how this is going to work and what potential issues you can get into. And we're going to dive into that next. All right, let's dive into how these kill and animal behavior and show the difference between these two. So with a bullet, I talk about this a lot, and I'm not going to go into super detail. You can watch my other videos for that. But when a bullet impacts a water-based mammal, what's going to happen is it's going to hit, it's going to expand, and the more it expands, the more displacement happens. You're going to displace it. It's like dropping a rock in a pool. You're going to see a displacement of water, and it's going to collapse back. That is your temporary wound cavity that you see in gel. That's what happens inside the animal. And what's going to happen is you're going to have your permanent wound cavity, which is going to be the crushing path from that bullet expanded. And then you're going to have your temporary wound cavity. Now, this is what allows for shot placement forgiveness, because it's going to cause more damage, especially if you get hydraulic wounding or hydraulic shock, to where it's stretching beyond the elasticity point of the media. And that's where you're going to get a wound cavity that's significantly larger than the actual bullet diameter. So you can hit, and you don't even have to hit perfect. You could be aiming and hit 5 inches away and still destroy that heart that you were 5 inches off of. Archery doesn't have that. Archery simply kills by cutting. And how much cutting is going to be dictated by how sharp the blades are, how wide they are, how large the cut, and how many blades you have. And so there is no forgiveness. The shot placement with this is absolutely critical. Now, why that comes to be such an important factor is because of the animal behavior of what I was talking about earlier with ducking, etc. Now, with archery, like I talked about, that danger close, that fight or flight response, because you're in such a close proximity, they can hear that string snap, they can see movement, and so they're going to go into that defensive fight or flight. And so with this being so crucial for shot placement, let's say that deer ducks, well, you hit the spine or something and it doesn't penetrate, just gets stuck in there. Guess what? That is a non-fatal shot, and you've just wounded that animal. If it turns, you can graze it and not get a good one. It can change your shot placement. If it takes a step, it can change your shot placement and can either be good or bad depending on that. It's just, there's so many factors. They don't move very fast. They have a longer flight time, and they are absolutely dependent upon perfect shot placement. And because of those actions of the deer, the movements of the deer are so critical that you want to either shoot it standing still, stopped, or you can time it if you're good enough when it's walking by. But generally speaking, you want to have them stopped. And you want to account for those movements, but even then, stuff can happen. And so you can hit that and have non-fatal shots. So it's one of those things that a lot of strange things can happen, and there's a lot that can go wrong with archery hunting. Now, people try to say that with long range, they have the same issues. We really don't. These bullets that we use are designed to open up massively, shed weight, cause a lot of trauma, and so you get a lot of shot placement forgiveness. So even though it's really not a big factor, because when you're at long range, you don't have that same threat. They're not reacting to anything because they're not going to be close enough to hear it. And even if they were, that bullet is going so fast that that bullet's hitting before the sound does. So there's no time for them to react. And at long range, same thing. Now, I hope this has helped you get rid of some of the confusion. There's a lot of misconceptions about long range out there, flight time, stuff like that, like I mentioned, from Hollywood, or people that don't know long range that are simply repeating stuff that they've heard, or hypotheticals, etc. So, long range isn't as difficult as you think. And these flight times aren't anything crazy. If you want to get into long range, get into it. I mean, how many people grab a bow and go bow hunting and nobody bats an eye? Long range is no different. Whether you get a bow, a rifle, a pistol, you should always be training and mastering it and always taking shots within your capabilities. So if you want to start long range, look at some schools. There's a lot of good ones. So, dive in, get the proper education, get the equipment, enjoy yourself out there. Everybody be safe. Happy hunting.
Hope you enjoyed this video, and make sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and turn on notification bell so you won't miss out on any future video, and happy hunting.